Thank you, Richard. Gene, please, you've got 5 minutes.
Well, Richard wrote a book called Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism. It was published 7 years ago. I read it quite recently. Richard probably hasn't read it very recently. That's where, at least commendably, he's written a whole book, a book, by the way, that Karl Marx never did write, about the socialism that he wants. And I quoted copiously from that book in my initial talk. If Richard is now going to say, oh, well, that book, it's forget that book, just, try to recognize that socialism is preferable to some of the crap that goes on now, then we'd have to say, Richard, we've been hearing that for over a century, from socialists. Then we had the Soviet Union, Stalin, then we had Mao, and then we've had a lot of mess from your socialism. You got to be a little bit more specific before we get the least bit interested in something that has been so disastrous for humankind. So I want to get Richard back on the straight and narrow and take him seriously that he's proposing something with a nuts and bolts definition: workers' self-directed enterprises. And the embarrassing thing for Richard, as it was for Marxists right back to the time of Marx, is that they're selling something that workers don't seem to want. We had socialism in Israel. We had 5% of the country really was socialist. I trust that Richard would agree that the kibbutzim of Israel, where 5% of them lived, really were socialists in a true sense, the bottom-up sense. And that's what I'm proposing. Now, of course, what also happened to Israel, as Richard probably knows, as you probably know, is that those kibbutzim just fell apart. They don't exist anymore. People lose interest in it. But again, what we are saying, we libertarians are saying, go for it. Workers, self-directed enterprises. You do have co-ops. Richard in another mood said, hey, look, you've got co-ops. It speaks to needs and desires, and indeed, maybe it does, then go for it. But then let's build it from the ground up, just like I'm proposing. And then we have a system of capitalism. Do I want to keep the flawed system of capitalism, the system that fights, the political system that protects the powerful? No. Capitalism is a system of profit and loss. Profits encourage risk-taking, losses encourage prudence. That's the system. Now, we abrogate that for the crony capitalist system. That's what brought about the housing bubble that caused the Great Recession. I'm quoting Noam Chomsky, a guy I also like, by the way, even though he's a socialist. To a too great extent, we privatize profits and we socialize losses. That's what the Federal Reserve does. That's what it's all about. Do I want to sit back and like the system? By God, no. We have a crony capitalist system, by the way, that shafts people of limited means most of all, that defends the rich and powerful, and there have been victories against it. We used to have an airline cartel protected by the Civil Aeronautics Board. Then somebody noticed that where the CAB didn't dominate, a flight between LA and San Francisco within the same state cost half what it cost to fly from Washington to Boston, or Washington, D.C. rather, to Boston, same distance, twice as expensive because of government. So then they abolished the CAB, and there was competition in the airlines, and that was a huge victory for middle-income people. So victories can be won. Richard, I want to recruit you to change this system of capitalism, if you'll excuse the expression that my socialist Uncle Abe used to use, but I use it as a contraction for crony capitalism. We need more capitalism, yet not less. We need to change things. Richard could join us, or he could focus on building his workers' self-directed enterprises from the ground up, building on top of the co-op movement, the employee ownership movement, which, by the way, already gets tax breaks that I don't necessarily object to, that already gets those breaks. Go for it. Turn everybody onto worker self-directed enterprises, and they're perfectly compatible. It's just like being in business for yourself. That's all it is. It's a great idea. It hasn't really caught on, but maybe it has potential. I welcome it. Thanks very much.
All right.